Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I'm going to make a really simple adjustable bookshelf. You've seen me completely build out this office, you've seen me build the desk and some speaker stands, and now it's time to make a super simple bookshelf to replace that old one. I'm going to make it fit underneath the window. I want the shelves to be adjustable in height, and I want to take all of that audio equipment and actually mount it in one of the shelves. This is a simple project that anybody can do, and actually you could do the entire thing with a circular saw if you wanted. Let's get to it. For the main body of the cabinet, I used 3/4 inch plywood. I picked birch, but you could use something cheaper, and if you wanted to go super cheap, you could even use MDF. As long as you're going to paint it, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was MDF when you were all finished. I started out by cutting out all the pieces out of one sheet. It helped a lot to have a stop block on the mitre saw so I could cut several pieces the exact same size. I swapped out my table saw blade with a dado stack, and this just makes it easier to cut a wide slot in one pass. You could do the same thing with a normal blade and cut several passes instead. I set this up about 3/8 of an inch so that my shelf would have a little bit of a lip to set in, and the fit was really nice. I also cut down some 1x4 pine to use as strips underneath the whole cabinet when it was put together. I drilled pocket holes into the top edge of each one of the upright pieces. These are mostly going to be hidden unless you're looking from the ground up into the bookcase. This makes it really quick and easy to put the case together. I added some glue to the dados and slid in the bottom shelf. If you're patient, you can let that dry and it'll be plenty strong, but I wanted to keep moving, so I added some brad nails to that to hold it together while the glue dried. To put the top piece in place, I added some glue and drove in the pocket hole screws. If you wanted to avoid the pocket holes altogether, this entire thing could be made with just dados. It'd be plenty strong and there'd be no visible fasteners. Notice I'm using a long clamp to hold these pieces in place. When you drive in that screw, it wants to separate the joint, so having that clamp to hold it tight and straight makes it really easy to get them screwed together. The placement of the interior upright pieces is really up to you. It depends on what you want to put on the shelves. And in my case, one side was going to hold audio equipment, so I set that gap to be a specific size and then split the remaining area into 3 equal parts. I drove screws right up through the bottom panel into the bottom of the upright and then used a square to make sure that this upright was square to the rest of the case. Then we measured out the other 2 uprights and put them in the exact same way. This thing's pretty strong and sturdy as it is, but once you add weight to the shelves, it'll eventually start to sag unless you support the middle. And to do this, I put on a piece of 1x4 spanning the entire gap. I pushed it back from the front edge 3/4 of an inch using a spacer. And for this one, instead of using brad nails, I just added glue and a lot of clamps to hold it in place until the glue dried. I cut down another one and did the exact same thing for the back side, but the placement doesn't really matter because you won't see it. I just got it roughly in place and clamped it as well. While those dried, I started drilling the holes for the adjustable shelves. I used a jig made especially for that. You could actually make your own jig to do this, but this was a pretty inexpensive option and came with all the bells and whistles that you need. And the instructions with it are super easy to follow, so I'm not going to rehash them here. I wanted to frame out the plywood top with a small strip of solid wood, and for that I used a piece of pine. I cut one piece down with a 45-degree angle to fit on the side of the bookcase. Once I got this fit right, I used it as a template to cut another piece the exact same size. To make the front piece, I cut a mitre on one end of the piece and held it up against the bookcase to mark the other end. Theoretically, this would give me a perfectly sized piece that would fit right across there. Unfortunately, sometimes when I do stuff like this, I get a little bit off. And the lesson there is to always leave a little bit extra, because you can always trim it, but you can't put it back. It took a couple of tries, but I finally got this cut to the right length, and now I'm going to put it on the front of the bookcase. But instead of using brad nails, I'm just going to glue and clamp it on. It's not a big deal either way, but this will give me a little bit less work to do. I won't have any holes to fill because I'm not sure if I'm going to paint this or stain it or just seal it. Pretty often long pieces like this are not perfectly straight, so if you get one end lined up and clamp it in place, then you can work your way down the piece, adding clamps all along the way, making sure that it always lines up. You also want to make sure to use enough clamps to close all of the small gaps all along the way, and wipe off the excess glue so you don't have to deal with it later. After I said that, I decided I'm gonna go ahead and paint the top, so I just used some brad nails to put on these side pieces, and I'm just filling up those holes with some wood filler. Of course, later on, I decided not to paint it, but it's still really handy to fill these small holes with some wood filler. The shelves are super simple. They're drop-in pieces of 3/4 inch plywood with a small piece of pine for the front edge. So we set up the stop block and used it to cut both types of pieces. We had to make several of these, so rather than clamping them all together, we added some wood glue, leaving some small gaps. In those gaps, we put CA glue, which will grab right away when you touch it to the activator. Some pressure squeezes the wood glue into the wood grain, and the CA holds it in place while the wood glue dries. Then we did a few more. After I took off the clamps of the top, it was time to cover the front exposed edge of the plywood with some wood veneer. This is an iron-on edge banding that you can use any iron with. It heats the glue on the back side, which sticks to the wood, and it's a little bit oversized, so you can come back and trim it and sand it to make a really nice fit. Eventually, you'll get what looks like a solid piece of wood. To finish the whole thing off, I did 2 coats of polyacrylic with a light sanding in between. I say this all the time, but this is a really simple to put on water-based finish. Instead of buying a whole rack to mount music equipment, you can actually just buy the rails, and as long as your opening is the right width, you can just screw these to the sides and mount your equipment. To make sure that these are perfectly flush with the front edge of the bookcase, I just used a scrap piece of wood held against the front face and lined up the bracket. Then each bracket got a couple of simple wood screws to hold it in place. Originally, I had the idea to put a really thin piece of backing on the whole bookcase, but leave this section open for cables to pass through. Once I got the whole thing put together, it didn't need that backing for strength, so I just left it off entirely. And even if you don't have audio equipment that you need to mount, these rails are pretty standard. It's the same thing you would use for a rack mount computer. Either way, it's great to get equipment off the top of the bookcase. The adjustable shelves are super standard. These little pegs go into the holes and the shelves sit right on top of them. Now note, there are 2 different standard sizes for these, so make sure you drill the right size holes for the right pegs. Once I got these in place, it was time to start filling up all the shelves. And here they are. I'm extremely happy with how they turned out, especially considering how easy they were to build. Really, if you had a circular saw and a straight edge, you could build this bookcase. And I made it to fit this spot in my room, but you could actually make it taller or wider, and the construction would be the same. One thing to keep in mind though, if you're gonna make any of these spans more than about 36 inches, you're gonna wanna support them from underneath. And I'd love to know what you think about these, so let me know down in the comments if you have any comments or questions about them. I am gonna have some plans for this particular bookcase to my dimensions on my site, and you can get those and modify those to fit your space. The link for that will be down in the description. I've also got lots and lots of other types of projects that you may be interested in, so be sure to check out those videos and don't forget to subscribe. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. That's it for this. I have to paint the top white, I think. So, and now I'm gonna put it on the front of the book.